5 security personnel lost their lives in an encounter with 2 terrorists over the weekend in the Handwara area in Kashmir. Now, among the security personnel who lost their lives was a colonel, there was a major, you had a couple of jawans of the army, and then a police sub-inspector. And on the other hand, we had 2 terrorists who were killed. Now, I have joining me on this episode a senior journalist with plenty of experience on writing on these matters. And he has argued that this situation, this disproportionate loss of lives on the army side was completely avoidable. So let's get in his thoughts. Jaideep, you have written that this situation was completely avoidable. Could you talk about that?
There are a few aspects to this. You see, why the commanding officer of the battalion, of the Rashtriya Rifles battalion, got killed, was shot dead, was because he had gone personally into the operation. He walked in with the company commander, Major Sood, and a Lance Naik and an I. So this was completely, he didn't need to do that. But if you see all the messages which came out from the army top brass and all after that, everyone said it's in keeping with the best traditions of the Indian Army that officer leads from the front. My take on this is the officer does not need to lead from the front, especially in this sort of situation. The commanding officer of a battalion of 900 men does not need to get personally involved in this. I mean, if he does gets involved in this, then what happens to the command of the 900 odd soldiers who are under him? They look to him for directions and all. Number one. Number two, the killing of or the death of officers, especially a senior officer of the rank of colonel, gives a huge morale boost to the adversary. In this case, the terrorists and their handlers in Pakistan. So, if we see the messages or the tweets on social media, etc., which are coming out from Pakistan over the last 36 hours, all of them are celebrating the unfortunate martyrdom of our officers and non-commissioned officers and the police sub-inspector, which is extremely unfortunate. But this needs to be, this should not have happened at all. Plus, another thing is, the aura that the militants or the terrorists, I'll call them terrorists have of invincibility, etc., that gets enhanced by the killing of a senior officer in such a situation.
Right. Jaideep, the way they approached this hostage situation, because the terrorists had taken a couple of civilians hostage, that's what the reports say. The way the army has approached a hostage situation like this, is this the best way to do it? What do you think about, say, if you compare it with warfare strategies outside of India, globally?
No, I wouldn't say this is the best way to do it. And right now, just to update you on this, there is a lot of suspicion if the officers and the NCOs had actually walked into a trap, if the civilians who were so-called hostages, if they were actually collaborators of the terrorists. That said, this only an inquiry and all that would, interrogation of the hostages, so-called hostages, would reveal that. But that said, this is not the way that it should have happened. My friends in the army tell me that in the past, and I also know for a fact that in the past, they would issue instructions over loud hailers to the terrorists to come out of a building. If they would not come out, despite repeated appeals, the terrorists would be told, now we are going to bring down the building. And in most of the cases, the terrorists would surrender and they would be given, they would be handed over to the police. They would not be shot dead after surrendering. And the house of, everything would go off fine. But in case they wouldn't surrender, the house would be just, brought down with mortars and grenades and all that. That is the way, armies all over the world also function. They do not go into this. From what we are hearing now is that the commanding officer and the others, I mean the major and the two NCOs and all, they walked into the house and there was a terrorist hiding in a cow shed who fired at them, killed them, and then lobbed a grenade, etc. I mean, this was a completely unavoidable situation. So that I don't think that this standard SOP now needs to change.
Right. Jaideep, also you've said that probably over the last 10 or 15 years, we've had this way of operation where civilians should be absolutely unharmed, untouched in any way. So that's the first priority. And with that condition in mind, our army sort of looks to take on the terrorists. How do you see us sort of working with that situation? Because that's a constraint that we are accommodating, and with that we go after the terrorists. What do you think about that situation?
Yeah, this doctrine needs to be revisited. That started happening sometime. This overemphasis on avoiding collateral damage at any cost. That started happening sometime in the middle of the last decade, especially after the UPA came to power. But that needs to be revisited now. That is not the way armies function all over the world. Yes, we're talking about human lives, I know, but some sort of collateral damage has to be accepted, because if you look at it from the other point of view, what has happened is why this avoiding collateral damage at any cost came about, in order to win the hearts and minds of the people. But actually, the hearts and minds of the people were never won by avoiding collateral damage. I'm talking about the Kashmir Valley. So that is why we need to revisit that. This keep it to the minimum, okay, the bare minimum. But some amount of collateral damage has to be acceptable. Right now, the army is under strict instructions that even if you let 100 terrorists go free, ensure that is okay, as long as not a single civilian would be harmed in any manner. And in the past, when the army has acted, they have been punished. Machil is one example, where the Kashmiri political establishment went overboard and they pressurized the prosecution of even a commanding officer, Colonel Patania, and other officers, another officer and Jawans. Then the Budgam case, where Maruti car being driven by youngsters, teenagers, etc. It did not stop at two checkposts and then wanted to crash through the third, and the army people fired. I think it was the Rashtriya Rifles again. Yes, they fired at them, and two of the teenagers were killed. And the narrative set out, the state government held an inquiry with its own officers, and they came out with the thing that it skidded. Which was completely ridiculous. So the army has in the past been punished. We have had for as simple a thing as a press statement giving the chronology of events some years ago, the Northern Army commander, Lieutenant General Jaswal, was forced to apologize to the then Chief Minister Omar Abdullah for issuing that. So that is a huge that affects the morale of the troops.
Right. Now, there's also finally a lot of talk about defense modernization, etc. So, do you think there is a space for us to say, look into using drones, for instance, in such matters, or maybe use of much more advanced technology where we can try and protect lives of Jawans?
Yes, we need to. Now, it's like the US Army or like even the Chinese Army. Now, we need to emphasize on one thing. We'll use technology and will not put the lives of our men and officers at risk, and we will not, like we say, collateral damage has to be avoided. There should be no civilian casualties. So the thinking also has to change, that from now on there should not be any casualties of the men in uniform also. That is also not accepted. It's just plain and simple as that. So we use technology and we avoid these sort of situations where an officer goes in or our troops, why just an officer, our soldiers go into a dangerous situation and get killed. Getting killed is not should not be acceptable. All our lives, especially and also not especially, but that's a wrong term. But all lives of every Indian, including the lives of people in uniform, are precious. That's the bottom line. That's it.
Thank you so much, Jaideep, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.